Hi there, it's Andrew Burke again from Code School Halifax. And in our last session, we put together a basic simple text file with our Visual Studio Code and showed it on a web browser. But that isn't really technically a web page because it doesn't have any of the things that make a web page really a web page. So today we're going to do that. In this session, we're going to put some tags in. We're going to format everything properly. We're going to add all the appropriate framing structure to make a web page a proper web page. And in fact, we're going to do this by setting up the real page that's going to be our page we're going to work with for all of our other lessons for the rest of this little course. Okay, so hang on, here we go. Now, in our last lesson, we had written a bit of text into this HTML file and figured out how to load it in our browser. And that's good, but this isn't really HTML yet. So we're going to start doing some proper HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's invented in the very late 80s by Tim Berners-Lee in Switzerland at the Particle Research Lab there as a way to format documents and allow them to connect with each other. Anyway, it's quite simple and fairly straightforward. What's nice again about all web stuff is that it's almost entirely just text with special characters snuck in here and there to mark things up. So hypertext means it's a text that has links, and markup means a way of taking a basic document with some text in it and marking it up with special things called tags that actually behave and look in certain ways. So let's start, and we'll show you what a tag is. So a tag is basically a little bit of text like this. And auto-completing, Visual Studio likes to auto-complete for you. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, and here's a tag. Okay, it is got little triangular brackets around some text. And then you have a bunch of content. And then somewhere at the end of that content, you have pretty well exactly the same thing as you had at the beginning, except it's got a slash in front of it. So this is a level 1 heading. So H1 is level 1 heading, which is sort of like if you ever used Microsoft Word, you have all those different levels of heading. This is like the title of the front of a page or something like that, or the level 1. So they go all the way down to level 6 with decreasing levels of intensity. But you can see here it's got triangular brackets around H1 and triangular brackets around /H1, and everything in between is influenced by that tag. So let's do a little 3-step. So that's Command S, Command Tab, Reload, Command R. And now you can see it's now big and bold, and we've got line breaks and everything. Okay, so this you can tell is now getting formatted because we've started putting tags in. Let's put some more tags in. Let's put these in what are called P tags, which mark something as a paragraph. Okay, and whoops. As you're typing, Visual Studio Code will often try to help by guessing what you might want to do. So you have a tag that's open, it will automatically fill in the closing tag for you. Okay, that's really handy. And sometimes if you're typing things, it'll even automatically give you the closing tag too. So you have to be careful. It's very helpful, but if you're adding tags to existing stuff, you have to make sure you can move that tag over to the end of your section. Okay, so there we go. We got 3 things with tags. Do our 3-step again. And there we go. Hello world, we're learning how to code. Isn't this great? This is known as the 3-step. Okay, so now we have some tags here. We have some other tags here. So that's header 1. These are paragraphs. And you'll notice a few little things here. As we're typing, we're getting more line numbers here. Also, if you click on a tag, it'll show you the beginning. It'll sort of highlight the beginning and the ending of the particular tag itself. If you click inside a tag, it'll highlight the matching beginning one. This isn't that big a deal yet, but when their page starts to get a bit more complicated, this will start to become super, super useful because it's really important to figure out where your tags are as you're working on things and as you're typing and stuff. So here we go. So that's great. We have our little page that's got some paragraphs and stuff, but this isn't really the page that we want to actually work on yet. We're not really, this is just some placeholder stuff. So we're going to get rid of all of this. Command A selects everything, delete. We're back to done. And we can save that and reload, and now there's nothing there. We're now going to set this page up properly as a proper web page. So ever since the web started way back in the late 80s and early 90s, there's been a standard format for how all web pages should go. And so it's just a boilerplate, and you set this up, and then you just don't have to worry about it anymore. I often end up just copy pasting this from a template or something like that, but we'll start from scratch here. So first is, and even you can see here actually, Visual Studio Code is helpful because it knows that we're starting a new HTML document, don't have anything on it. It's like, do you want to put doc type in? In this case, yes. So we hit enter, and it automatically fills in everything we need, which is a special tag called doctype HTML. First thing you'll notice is we're kind of redundant here. We already have HTML at the end of the file name. That's good for some contexts, but sometimes it likes to know up here as well. This is just the standards for things. Don't worry about it exactly yet. Then we have a tag called HTML. This means here the HTML that we're going to actually have in this document is going to be in between these two tags. And almost anything will be all inside this. In theory, you could have other tags like text or SGML or whatever else, but we don't tend to use that anymore. It's almost entirely HTML. And then we have a head tag. And then down here we have a body tag. Okay, and as you see, I'm typing, Visual Studio Code is finishing them up for me. That's great. So you can see here, HTML. Now, if you're wondering what all these mean, you can actually roll over and it'll give you a little hint. Okay, now often these hints are kind of technical and they might not give you a huge amount of context, but it's nice to be able to see at least there's some things there. And you can actually click on this and it'll take you to a reference page on the web if you're really interested. You might have to say confirm yes, and you can see here. Now the thing with the MDN documents is they tend to be a little technical. They're more like explaining things for people who already know sort of what it is. But it's nice, usually they have an example so you can see how they sort of fit together. Okay, put that away. So here's our basic page, and there's a head section on any page, and there's a body section on any page. Now let's put something in the body right now. We'll do another H1, and let's actually give it a proper name for what we're going to be trying to do. Okay, so now let's do our 3-step. There we go. We've got a proper page with a proper heading. Now, the body is where anything shows up that's visible on the page. The head section is for all sorts of other things that aren't actually visible on the page itself. They're for links to other resources. They're for extra context information that things like search engines or social media networks might pick up on. In this case, we're going to start up with a title tag. And we're going to make it slightly different from the H1 here, which is to make it the title. Now this doesn't show up on the page at all, but if we open a new tab, you can see here the title, number of recoveries, is now in the tab title. And you would see this in our browser history, you'd see this in various other places and bookmarks. So the title is useful for things, but it's not something that actually shows up on the page yet. And that is fine. Okay, let's then do a little bit of text. Okay, so there we go. And then, so these are tags here, H1 and P. And then I'm going to put some stuff at the bottom. I'm going to put another thing here. It's going to be, let me think. And what I'm going to have is a link to the Wikipedia article. Now, one thing that's nice, it's easy to run out of space, especially if you're on a laptop when you're typing, because it doesn't word wrap, because lines of code are important to stay as lines often. So you usually end up scrolling left and right. But to save horizontal space to get some more, you can always close these sidebars, and that's handy, or grow your window a little bit. So that's good to keep in mind. And then we're going to add an extra tag in here called href, and we'll figure out what that actual link is in a minute. Okay, now this is an anchor tag, which means a little piece of text is going to be anchored in a certain way. And once again, a tag, and then we have the closing tag. And it has what are called attributes. Okay, some tags can have attributes, some don't. None of the ones we've done here yet have any attributes, but ahref will. And it's got a space, and then you have some attribute. This is hyperref. This means it's a link. Equals, and then some other value. And you can see, you'll see a lot of the times if you look at other code somewhere, you'll see all sorts of things where it's whatever, the tag itself, and then a bunch of other things separated by spaces with whatever equals whatever, whatever equals whatever, whatever equals whatever. Okay, I've just copied and pasted Here is the article. Okay. So now we can have that open if we need to. And another attribute, which is often good. And you can see there as I was typing, it was actually giving me suggestions. You can roll over, and one of them is blank and always puts it in a new browser. Okay, so you can see here there's one attribute which is href, and another attribute separated by a space called target equals blank. Okay, so let's three-step over. Okay, to find out more about COVID-19, please check the Wikipedia article. And there it is. Okay, I'm going to close that. So you can see there, we've now set ourselves up 2 paragraphs and a heading and a link that goes somewhere. So we have basically everything from HTML. So hypertext, HT, is the link. Okay, so it's a hypertext that gives you a hyperlink to another page, just like a spaceship going into hyperspace. And we're marking up, because we have tags everywhere, which is marking up this content that we've put together. And L for language, because it's sort of a language. It's a set of tags that follow certain rules. Okay, so now we're going to just set up some other placeholders for the rest of the things we're going to do in this. Okay, so then we can do div id equals global count, div id equals by country. Okay, now this divs, now there's paragraph tags, there's header tags, there's all sorts of tags for all sorts of things. But we often want to end up making our own tags that do our own things. And a way to do that is using what's called a div tag, which is just an empty placeholder, basically. As it says, if you roll over, it says, the div element has no special meaning at all. Okay, so it's just a box that you can put things in. And then you can give that box extra context with your attributes, like we had here. So in this case, we're going to get an ID class, an ID attribute. It's not a class, it's an ID, which is a way of assigning a particular sort of identifier to a particular specific thing on the page. So only one thing on a given page should have a particular ID. And in this case, we have one section at the top. So we're going to have a section at the top with somewhat large text that's going to show the global count of recoveries from COVID-19. And at the bottom, we're going to have a little section that's going to be a list of all the countries with their recoveries and recovery rates and things like that. So we're going to fill this in with data that we pull off the internet. We'll talk about that later. But for now, we're just setting up the basic placeholders. So ID equals global count. Let's give them a class, and we'll talk about that later, why we're doing this. Okay, give it a class of box section. This will come in useful when we start doing CSS. But we'll show you the point here is that you can have things with IDs, which are unique, and things with classes, which aren't unique. So here's 2 different things that are called boxed section. We have a box around them and some padding and spacing once we get to that part. But you can see here and then we'll just put some content in. But you can see 2 things are called class, have the same class, but we don't have the same ID for more than one thing at a time. I like to think of the distinction as being sort of like cars. So you can have a Ford car and a Toyota car. You can have a red car, a blue car. You can have many cars that are blue, many cars that are red, many cars that are Ford or Toyota. You can have a blue Toyota car. You can mix and match all of these things. But an ID is more like the license plate or the VIN, even more so. It's a unique identifier that only applies to one car, right? Same thing here. An ID is only applied to one thing on the page, and a class can be applied to lots of things. Why? We'll get to that later. It'll make a bit more sense once we get further along in adding all the different elements to the page. So let's just put some placeholder content in here. Let's put global count inside here and by country count in here. Do our little 3-step. Reload. Okay, there we go. Global count by country count. So we've got ourselves a basic page that doesn't have much in it, but we're ready for more. There's a ton of different tags. I'm going to put a footer in. Okay, and maybe that'll have a link in it as well. We'll put a link in here to our Code School Halifax page. can't type today. Okay, so now we have, there we go. Footer is a bit like a div. It doesn't have any intrinsic styling like the H1 says is all big and bold, but we will be adding layout and styling to this down the line. But you can see here we have our global count, country count, brought to you by Code School Halifax, etc. Okay, so that's some basics of HTML. We now have ourselves a basic HTML page that we're going to start filling up with more interesting details shortly.